Today we're gonna make an easy cinnamon swirl bread that is so delicious you don't even need to butter it. Welcome to The Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And believe it or not, even though that bread and that swirl looks a little fancy, this recipe is very easy to make. In fact, I'm not even gonna use my stand mixer, so if you don't have one, you can make this dough by hand. But if you do have a stand mixer, I would use it. It does make it go a little bit quicker. All right, let's jump right into it, okay? Because really mixing up the dough is super easy. What I have here is 3 cups of all-purpose flour. You don't need bread flour for this recipe, although you could use it if you wanted to. And then I have an extra 1/4 cup available if needed. Because when you're making bread, you're gonna put in the ingredients, but you want to have a little wiggle room, being able to add either more dry or more wet ingredients to make the consistency of the dough the way that it needs to be for the recipe. For a brioche dough, which is essentially what we're going to make today, and then we're gonna add in the raisins and then add in the cinnamon swirl. For a brioche dough, which is an enriched dough, meaning it can have various different ingredients like butter, eggs, milk, things like that. It is a little bit of a wetter dough, okay? So it's not quite as dry as some low hydration bread doughs are. So we start off with 3 cups of flour. We can add more if we need to. To the flour mixture, I'm gonna add in 2 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast. So you could use just 1 packet, that is the equivalent, or you could use any kind of instant yeast that you have. If you wanna use active dry yeast, you're gonna wanna proof it. So maybe heat your milk up a little bit and you can proof it right in the milk, okay? That would work fine. For this, I just sprinkle it right into the flour and then just give it a mix around. We're gonna put in 2 tablespoons of sugar, which this is optional. You don't have to use the sugar. I liked the slight sweetness of the dough because it's a cinnamon raisin bread, but it's totally up to you, okay? You don't have to use that. All right, so now that we've got that mixed in, I'm gonna start to add in some of the wet ingredients. And I still have salt, which I'm gonna add that in just a minute. First thing I'm gonna add is 2 large eggs that I have lightly beaten. Now, if you are using a stand mixer, you don't have to beat the eggs first. Just add them in whole because your stand mixer is gonna do that work. But since I'm doing it by hand, I'm gonna add them in already beaten up. Then I have 4 tablespoons of melted, but not super hot butter, okay? You don't want it to be so hot that it gets in there and kills the yeast. So microwave it or melt it on the stove and then let it cool down a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna stir this in and then I'm gonna add in the salt, which is 1 teaspoon of kosher or fine grind sea salt. If you're gonna use table salt, use half as much, so about half of a teaspoon. And the salt, really, you don't have to use the full teaspoon either. It's not gonna affect your outcome. But when I make things, whether they're sweet or savory, I like to add salt. Even with the sweet things, it brings out the sweetness a little bit more. I found in this recipe, 1 teaspoon of salt worked great. If you wanna try it out with half of a teaspoon, be my guest, it's perfectly fine. It's not gonna affect the outcome, okay? It might affect the taste a little bit, but your bread's still gonna turn out fine. All right, now we're gonna add in the milk. You can use milk or you can use half and half. You could use heavy cream and water if that's all you have at home. 3/4 cup. Pour that right in. Now we're gonna mix this up. And I expect it to be on the wet side, but that is perfectly fine. The raisins will go in a little bit, so I'm gonna put those over to the side. So once I see that most of the flour is incorporated in this bowl, I will turn it out onto my pastry mat and give it a little bit of a knead. Now you could technically make this into a no-knead dough by mixing it a little bit and then covering it and just letting it sit or putting it in the refrigerator to sit overnight. That would be okay. That would work out for this recipe. But I'm gonna move things along a little bit quicker by giving it a short knead by hand. So let me move this over here and I'll put a little bit of flour down. If you pour too much like I just did, just move it over to the side. You can always bring it in if you need to. Make sure your hands are nice and clean, and let's turn the dough out onto the pastry mat. Now, brioche dough is a little bit wetter, a little bit stickier. If that is a problem, like if you can't stand it on your hands, like I'll just tell you a secret. I can't either. It really bothers me when I have sticky stuff on my hands. Do this. Sprinkle the flour over top, pat it down, and then start to knead, okay? And it's gonna make it so much more pleasant for you. And that 1/4 of a cup is actually put in usually with the stand mixer. So we're not breaking any rules. We're not putting more flour in than you would ordinarily use. We're just making it a little bit easier to hand knead it by adding it after the fact, okay? And we're gonna knead it all in, so it's gonna get incorporated into the dough. But you can see now I'm not sticking nearly as much. And this is actually feeling pretty good as far as texture goes. And I used about 2 tablespoons. So that's what I want you to go by when you're mixing up your dough, whether it's by hand or if it's in the mixer. You want it to be slightly tacky. As the brioche dough proofs, it is going to become so lovely and it will no longer be sticky, okay? So having it tacky, but maybe not tearing off onto your hands so much, is exactly the right hydration for this type of dough, okay? All right, so I'm just gonna do this. And you don't really have to do this for any long length of time. We're gonna put this into proof, and I'm gonna use the proof function on the Ninja Combi. You could, if you have the Ninja Foodie or any other appliance that has the proof function, you could do it the same way, or you can leave it on the counter. Now, because we do a short knead on this, I do a longer proof, okay? That just helps to develop the gluten and hold everything together, okay? The idea of proofing is not to go by time, it's to go by size, okay? So you want this to double in size, so keep an eye on it. All right, now it is time to knead in the raisins. If you're using a mixer, you put them in, okay? And just let the dough hook knead them in. It's perfectly fine. But when I'm doing it by hand, I do it a little bit differently. So I spread it out. Spread the dough out a little bit like that. Sprinkle some raisins on. If they're clumped up, try to break them up. And then basically, I just knead them in the dough. Just like that. And repeat until they're all in. You don't need to moisten your raisins before making this recipe. I know with some recipes they'll say to moisten the raisins. I have not found that necessary, probably because this is, it's got enough hydration in it that as the raisins sit in there, they just kind of hydrate a little bit, and they're nice and plump and delicious in the raisin bread. And don't worry if some of your raisins tear through. That's gonna happen. No matter how you knead them in, it's gonna happen. All right, and that's 3/4 of a cup of raisins. Okay, then before I proof, what I try to do, if I can, is try to get all of the raisins so they're not popping through the bread. It's okay if you can see them, but they're not actually poking through. If you can't get them all, don't worry about it. But I don't want the dry heat to dry the raisins any more than they already are. All right, if you don't have a proofing function on your oven or any of your appliances, then you would put this into a bowl covered. There we go. There we go. See, wasn't that hard. Put this into a bowl, cover it with saran wrap, let it sit on your countertop 1 to 2 hours at room temperature until it doubles in size. Because I have the combi, I'm gonna use that to proof. And it's great because there's no fan going, so it doesn't dry out. I don't have to cover this with anything. I just absolutely love it. This is the inner pan, and I just throw it right in there and kind of take a visual so I can see where it sits in the pan so I know when it doubles. It's gonna mostly double outward, not upward, because we've got room to expand this way, so that's gonna be its natural way to go. So I'll look for it to be twice as big around, okay? All right, so no oil or butter or anything needed in the pan. It won't hurt if you put some butter in there, but it's not needed. The brioche dough already has enough fat in it. It doesn't stick, and if it does, it's so minor. You'll see when we're done. Okay, let's turn the combi on, and I'm already here at the proof setting, but if you weren't, you would just move these buttons down until you get to the proof setting. You can set it different temperatures. I go all the way up to 95 for this. That's the hottest proof setting on this appliance, and I hit start. It defaults to 45 minutes, and I go up to 60 and check it in about 45. So it usually takes about an hour, maybe even longer, for it to double in size. So it's not something that doubles quickly. All right, so on the counter at room temperature, it could take 2+ hours. So don't go by time, go by looks. When it doubles in size, then we're ready to go and create the cinnamon swirl, which is so much fun to do and much easier than you may think. So my total proof time was 1 hour and 15 minutes, and I took a peek and it is doubled in size. See there? Yep, perfect. All right, now we just take it out and see it did not stick, told you, and slap it right down there onto the work surface. If you don't have a pastry mat, you could use a clean countertop, that's fine. You do need something that's fairly large. Before I get to shaping this and adding the cinnamon sugar, let me talk about the pans, okay? Because you can use a couple different types of pans. This one is a 1-pound loaf pan, specifically for bread making. You can use this. If it's darker in color, you may decrease your bake time a little bit, but if it's light like this one, you'll go with my bake time. Or you can use a meatloaf pan like this one, okay, to bake the bread in. I call it a meatloaf pan. It's probably a loaf pan too. This is 9 by 5. This is like 8.5 by 4.5. They both work perfectly fine. No changes in your time or temperature, okay? All right, to prepare the pan, I like to use parchment paper, okay? My biggest fear is that the dough or the bread, when it's done, is gonna stick to the pan. And then what? Then you're scraping down with a knife and trying to get it out. So I use parchment. You probably don't have to because there's enough fat in this dough. It's probably going to release just fine. But again, you go to all this trouble to make your bread dough. You don't want it to stick in there when it's baked. So this is what I do. Take a little bit of butter that's softened into the cake pan. I know this is sounding weird, but just trust me on this one, okay? I'll show you why. And I put it especially in the corners, right in the middle, and then along the edge, just in a little line, like that, okay? So just a little bit of the butter. Then I take a sheet of parchment that is cut to size, pretty much, more or less, and put it right down like that. See how this is coming out? That's why I use the butter. So if you see that, press it down so it's flat against the pan. The reason why I do this is so the bread dough fills the pan and creates the right shape, okay? Now, I take another piece and put it right in the center here. And if you are using an oven, that's all you need to do. I'm gonna use the steam and crisp function on the combi because it just does a beautiful job adding a little bit of steam, kind of like, you know, a steam oven for baked breads. It just works great. So that's what I'm gonna use. So I will trim these off. Once I get it nicely attached to the side, I'll just go with some scissors and trim those off. Okay, I've still got butter on my hands. No big deal, doesn't matter. Help you form the dough. All right, so now you wanna take your dough and stretch it out. And you can use your pan as a guide. I'm gonna put this in front, but then I'll move it to show you what I mean. You want the dough to be about the length, maybe a half an inch bigger on each side as your pan. Okay, so whatever, bread pan you're gonna use. So stretch it out so it's like that. You don't need a rolling pin or anything. Just stretch it out so it's like that. Now I'm gonna move this so you guys can see better. So that is about the width that I want, okay? Then I'm gonna go and get it don't worry if it tears like that, it's perfectly fine. All right, now the secret to getting a beautiful swirl is to get it as long as you can, at least 12 inches in length. So let's see where we are right now. We're at 13, so we're good. So that's all I need to do. Super easy. It's super easy to pull this dough apart. Again, don't worry about this, okay? That makes no difference. It's not gonna matter. That looks good. Now we're gonna take about 1 to 2 tablespoons of soft butter and go all along the dough. The edge that's closest to you, go all the way to the end. The sides and the top, leave about a half of an inch. And just lightly spread the butter. Now you could use melted butter and brush it on, that's fine too, but I just find this to be easier because I use it for the pan and it just seems easier for me. All right, there we go. That looks great. Now let me wash up my hands and then we will get the cinnamon sugar on and we will roll it up and I'll show you how easy that is. All right, once you have your butter down or before, it doesn't matter which sequence you do this in. You want 6 tablespoons of brown sugar. You could use dark or light. I have light here. And 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon. Yes, it's a lot. This is cinnamon raisin bread. And then mix it up really well. All right, that looks good. And now we just sprinkle it all over. Now, where this edge is right here, remember we put butter all the way to the bottom, so we are gonna put the cinnamon sugar all the way to the bottom. And then on the edges, we're gonna try to keep that half of an inch unseasoned. And the reason being is it's gonna make it easier to seal everything up when we're done rolling. You will use all of this and you want to use all of this. I promise you, you are gonna love this bread. It is so amazing. It's better than any store-bought cinnamon raisin bread that I've ever tried. Oh my gosh. It's just so incredible. Like I like my cinnamon raisin bread toasted and buttered and everything else. And I decided to try it without buttering or toasting it. And I was like in love with it. Like I don't even need to butter or toast it. Although it's still good that way too. Okay, there we go. Now you want to start at the edge closest to you and we're going to do a very tight roll. Now what happens is if you don't make this long enough, I went at least 12 inches, 13, 14 is fine. If you don't go long enough, if you cut it off like at 8 and you just do like 1, 2 rolls and then seal it and put it in there, you're not gonna have that beautiful swirl. And I know this because that's what I did when I first started testing the recipe. And I was like, why don't I have a beautiful swirl? So I thought, let me try more rolls tightly together and see what happens. And that is when this magic happened, okay? So super easy to do, but follow me, okay? We're gonna count as we go. When I say small, I mean a very small roll, like that. And I consider that 1 roll. Now we're gonna do it again. 2 rolls. 3 rolls. 4 rolls. 5 rolls, 6 rolls, and that's good, okay? So 5, 6, that's good. Try to do at least 5. Then lift this up, pat it down into your dough, pinch it together. We want to make it seamless so that we don't have any problems with the cinnamon sugar leaking out. Then on the sides, what I like to do is just sort of tuck them in a little bit. And again, just seal them. Go back over. Push it together. Now, I'm going to tell you something else that's kind of funny about this dough, is that no matter how careful I am, it always seems to rise just a little uneven, and it bakes just a little uneven. Don't worry about it. You did everything right, and it's still going to be absolutely delicious and perfect. Okay, so no worries there. I don't know why that is. I try to make it as even as it can going in, right? Then we just plop it into our pan. Now this is probably why, because then you got to kind of fit it in there. But then look what I do. Then I press it down so it fills the pan. And I try to make it even on top. And watch when it comes out. It'll still be a little uneven. Doesn't matter though. All right, so press it into your pan. All right, that looks good. It's nice and even. Another thing that I'll say is if you see a raisin, doesn't matter if you can see them through the dough, but if you see one poking out, poke it back in, okay? And then just seal up the dough around it. All right, now I'm just gonna take these off. The reason why I cut the little excess off, and you don't have to do this if you're using a regular oven, is because of the fan. Okay, so if you're using a convection oven or any type of appliance that has a fan that's gonna blow, I'm being a little too particular here, aren't I? You want to have the edges cut off because what will happen is the air will fold them over, and that impedes the rising and it impedes the baking process. So we don't want that. I'll just turn them off here. All right, that looks good. I'm gonna proof it back in the combi. I'll use the same pan. Not even gonna worry about cleaning it out or anything. Just place the pan in there. We're gonna go back on proof. What you wanna see, it doesn't have to double in size, okay, now. What you wanna see is it's risen above your baking dish. Okay, so this one's gonna rise up about 3 inches. So I'll just start to see it dome over the loaf pan, and then I know I'm ready to go. I'm gonna put it in for another 60 minutes. Might be done in 45. I'll let you know when it's perfectly proofed. All right, so I went a total of 60 minutes on this second proof time, and I saw that the dough is just crusting over the top, so we're good to go. Now, ordinarily, you wouldn't even need to pull the pan out. I'm just doing that for you guys so you can see that we are just over the top here. Again, like I said before, little uneven rise. Don't worry about it. It turns out amazing. All right. Now, what I do is put in 1/2 cup of water. And because of the size of the combi, the pan goes directly in the bottom. No rack, no nothing. You need it to sit low in the pan, and the rack raises it just a little too much because as we start cooking, it's gonna rise up more, and you don't wanna get it too close to the heating element in the upper part of the Ninja Combi. I also cover this about 20 to 30 minutes into the cook time, okay? Same in the oven though. It bakes up fine in the oven. That other loaf is from the oven. But you wanna cover it after it's started to bake and has been in there for about 30 minutes, okay? All right, so now we've got our water, which is gonna produce the steam. And this is the benefit of the combi. Or you could do it if you had a smaller pan and you kind of cut the recipe ingredients down some. You could do this in the Ninja Foodi with the steam crisp function as well, and it would work great. This pan just doesn't fit in the Foodi, and I wanted to make a full size loaf of the raisin bread. So we're gonna use the combi, and the steam, it's just like a steam oven. I'm sure you guys have heard about how the benefits of baking bread in a steam oven. So this is my mini, less expensive steam oven. because they can be pretty pricey. I've looked at them. I've always wanted one. So when the Combi came out, I'm like, is this gonna be my answer? And at first I was like, it's not, because it's not big enough. But now I figured out some workarounds and it works beautifully. All right, so now we wanna make sure that we're on the Combi cooker setting. So you don't wanna be here, which is air fry, dry heat only. We wanna be up here. And we're gonna go to Combi Crisp. We're gonna set the temperature to 300 degrees. Fahrenheit. And then we're gonna go to the time of 50 minutes. And hit start. The Combi Crisp function will heat up the water in the pan, produce the steam. That preheat time only lasts 3 to 5 minutes, okay? But the steam is still in the oven when the fan starts and the dry heat starts to come down from the top. So we are steaming a little bit longer, probably 10 to 15 minutes, which works really well for this bread. You don't wanna go to Combi Bake because it's gonna be a 20-minute preheat, a lot more steam, and it bogs down the dough too much. For this recipe, there probably are other bread recipes that would work in, but not this one. Use Combi Crisp or use your plain oven because that works just fine. The temperature is a little bit different. The time is a little bit longer, but not much. So either way works fine, and I'll have the instructions for the oven temperatures and all that on my written post on my website, thesaltedpepper.com. Oh yeah, I'd say we are brown on top. So just under 20 minutes of the countdown, okay? Remember, we have that extra little 3 to 5 minutes in the beginning of preheat. Let's go ahead and open this up. Definitely wear protection here because this is gonna be very hot. Now, if your Combi is facing you, you don't usually have to take it all the way out, but because mine is not, we're gonna take it all the way out. Now this is not close to being done, so I'm not even gonna worry about taking a temperature at this point, but I wanna cover the top. Keep your gloves on. Silly me, right? I'm trying to do that all gracefully and I'm burning myself. All right. There we go. That's all we need to do. It's just gonna keep that heat off the top directly. So this is good. It's fine that the heat can get underneath here. That's just gonna keep it baking along. But we have the top covered so that the direct heat's not going right down onto the top, which could cause it to burn, okay? So there we go. Now we go probably about 20 minutes and then I'll check a temperature. We want our brioche dough to have an internal temperature of about 190 degrees, okay? Now I don't usually take the temperature of bread, I don't, but in case you just don't know if it's done yet. There's nothing worse than letting your bread cool and then cutting into it and finding out that it's underbaked. I mean, I've done that. So taking a temperature of it can help, okay? If you're making the recipe for the first time and you're using maybe your oven instead of the Combi, you know, or another appliance and you don't know exactly what the timing will be, the temperature will help. All right, it's been 38 minutes, so let's go ahead and do a temp. It looks so beautiful. Now what I try to do when I'm doing a temp is go in at the side. So you can either go in like down here or down here with your instant read thermometer and kind of go down at an angle so you're getting into the center. And we are at 161. So we are not quite done. We're gonna keep going, so I'll let the time run out. And by that time, we should be good to go. All done. right. Oh my gosh, this looks so beautiful. Let's see. We are 189. That is good. That is fine. So 50 minutes. That's what it's been every time. So, okay. Now you can leave it in the pan for a little bit to cool if you want to, or you can turn it right out. It doesn't really matter. I've done it both ways. Usually what I do, move this right there. I usually let it cool in the pan for a few minutes and then turn it out. But like I said, it doesn't matter. Look at that. Oh, that is so beautiful. Completely even browning, okay? All over. It is gorgeous. That is one of the things that I am so impressed about with the Combi, okay? Is this even browning. It's the shape, it's the design of it, right? Now you get the same all over browning in the oven. So there's no difference, okay? What I'm kind of referring to is when I bake bread and things in the foodie or some other appliances, they don't get done on the bottom without having to like flip them and stuff. So this is the oven. That's the Combi. They are both beautiful, gorgeous. And you can see, I told you there's going to be one little hump somewhere. This one was in the front. So it was way up in the front. But anyway, it's going to work out beautifully. So now we have to let it cool. I know, terrible. This is the worst part. But you want to let it cool all the way. So I recommend letting it sit overnight, but at least for a couple of hours, okay? Now, if you really have to, try it. Wait at least 30 minutes and then cut off the end, okay? The moment of truth. How does our swirl look inside? Ooh, I'm so excited. No matter how many times I've made this, I still get a little nervous when I go to cut it because I just cross my fingers and pray that the swirl's beautiful. All right, here we go. We're going straight down the middle. I didn't really see. You guys see before me. Oh, it looks good. Now I can see the difference between my hand kneading and machine kneading. Okay, so I can see the difference, definitely. But both are gonna be absolutely delicious. And I think mostly what we're seeing here, some of the darker spots are the raisins, and they just get better mixed with the mixer. But if you don't have one, this is gonna work perfectly. All right, here we go. And I'm still a little warm, I'll be honest. I didn't wait 2 hours. I waited like 30 minutes, okay? So I didn't even follow my own rules. All right, what I love about this bread is the crisp exterior with the soft, buttery bread, and then of course that cinnamon sugar filling. And as I said in the very beginning of the video, you do not even need to butter or toast it. Now it is delicious, buttered and toasted as well. Now you see how mine's kind of like falling apart here? So this filling, super, super hot. I just got some on my finger. I didn't let it cool. Do as I say, not as I do. All right, I am still gonna taste it, but this like reminds me of a warm cinnamon bun. Oh my goodness gracious. So when it's completely cool, it's sturdier, okay? But if you want ooey gooey and messy hands and you just can't wait, cut into it while it's warm. Oh my goodness. It is so delicious. You don't need butter.